Modern progress is often viewed through the lens of Charles Darwin. His observations of natural selection suggest that individual competition for limited resources is the primary engine of biological and societal evolution. This competitive framework, the bedrock of global capitalism, proved highly effective at generating initial wealth. It incentivized the creation of the massive, interconnected technological systems we rely on today. However, as these systems reach extreme levels of complexity, they trigger a volatility paradox. The same individual competition that built the system starts to create hidden global fragility. The core components begin to warp under the strain of interconnectedness. This instability stems from agents externalizing entropy. To succeed locally, individuals or corporations offload their waste, costs, and chaos onto the broader system, hoping someone else will deal with the disorder. A society focused solely on individual competitive advantage eventually poisons its own environment with this unmanaged chaos, compromising the structural integrity of the entire civilization. We map this risk as a blowout zone. This chart tracks costs aggregating at the base. When pressure breaches that threshold, the system loses its ability to absorb shocks, leading to collapse. In this state, the sheer volume of externalized noise causes computational intractability, leaving institutions unable to process the complexity or govern reality. Markets are designed to optimize for efficiency, but they lack a built-in feedback loop to repair this type of aggregate systemic damage once it reaches a critical state. Surviving the blowout zone requires a shift from economic theory to physical stabilization. It demands a mechanism that addresses the underlying thermodynamic crisis of the system. Historically, the counterweight to Darwinian competition was Peter Kropotkin's theory of mutual aid. He observed that in the natural world, cooperation was often a more significant factor in survival than individual combat. Kropotkin's work provided the intellectual scaffolding for classic socialist and Marxist ideals. If cooperation ensured survival in nature, they argued, human society should be structured around egalitarianism and collective support. However, 20th century socialism often relied on moral pleading and ideological truth. This made it vulnerable to political defeat, as it was treated as a subjective preference rather than a functional necessity. The math of Claude Shannon and Ludwig Boltzmann changes the conversation. Shannon's information theory measures the surprise or information content within a system. Complex aggruppations, like civilizations, represent more information, and keeping that information from dissolving into entropic noise requires the exact mutual aid Kropotkin described. Natural selection acts on individuals, but the laws of thermodynamics act on the systems those individuals form. Altruism is simply the mechanism that maintains a group's informational complexity against the natural pull of entropy. This creates a physical requirement called entropy-driven altruism. In any complex society, survival depends on agents proactively allocating resources to reduce the entropy burden of others. This model reinterprets the classic socialist critique of exploitation. What we call extraction is actually a dominant node dumping its entropy burden onto a subordinate one, increasing the fragility of the entire network. The philosopher John Rawls famously described justice as fairness, arguing that social arrangements should prioritize the stability and well-being of the least advantaged members. Translated into the Bridge 360 framework, Rawls's justice becomes a physical constraint. This graph shows nodes dynamically sharing the load to ensure no single agent is pushed outside the viability corridor, the safe operating range required for a system to stay navigable. Structural social justice functions as a thermodynamic stabilizer, preventing the individual data points from drifting into the zone of critical fragility. In a complex society, the equitable sharing of resources is a physical requirement for survival, as objective as the laws of gravity. This thermodynamic approach to governance bypasses the baggage of the 20th century. It does not require a debate over moral superiority or the pursuit of an ideological truth. Instead, the political spectrum collapses into a single thermodynamic axis. Institutions are evaluated solely on their ability to maintain systemic coherence and prevent the entropic dumping that leads to blowout. Governance becomes a truth-neutral scientific discipline focused on one metric: the management of entropy under finite budgets. The 21st century presents runaway risks, from ecological tipping points to the complexities of artificial intelligence, that are pushing our systems toward their limits. Approaching these threats as competitive puzzles only accelerates our trajectory toward the blowout zone. The only mathematically viable way to absorb these global shocks is through the active sharing of the entropy burden. When we distribute costs across the entire matrix, the structure gains the flexibility needed to stay resilient. Responsibility for the collective is the primary operational constraint for any system that wishes to remain stable. In the physics of the future, entropy rules the universe, and therefore altruism must rule our governance.